The latest news hitting the airwaves was absolute trash. The group of Korean hunters who dared to challenge a 6-star gate had failed yet again. Following this massive flop, netizens were already blowing up the comment sections, aggressively reacting to next year's international raid competition. The overall anxiety and worry were only mounting. Inside a transport vehicle, one man watching the news broadcast commented that the old rivalry with Japan was a thing of the past. There was just no way to go head-to-head with them anymore. Another young guy instantly snapped back, arguing that the Korean group still brought in way more cash than the Japanese hunters. But the older man riding in the same vehicle comforted them both, saying that despite the setbacks, they still needed to have faith in the rookies. He then turned and asked for the opinion of Seo Yul, the leader of the rescue department. Seo Yul responded calmly that this kind of stuff was for the combat hunters to stress over, and that the rescue team should solely focus on the emergency calls they were currently responding to. The driver let out a quick chuckle, mentioning he only brought it up because Seo Yul was always such a serious guy. The other young man who had been watching the news chimed in, adding that hunter guilds were all the same in the end anyway, while they, the rescue squad, were the ones taking all the heat and pressure. Seo Yul thought to himself that this was the textbook complaint of a typical public servant, but deep down, he knew that was their reality. The Hunter Agency was an organization primarily made up of mid-tier awakened individuals. Their operations were split into 3 separate departments: alerts, supervision, and rescue. Under this system, whenever things went sideways inside the gates, it was the rescue hunters who had to dive in to save the civilians and the other hunters. Seo Yul's primary role as the department leader was acting as a tracker. He could pinpoint traces, evidence, and tiny details that nobody else ever noticed. Right at that moment, the squad was pulling up to a new emergency scene, prepping themselves to enter the gate. The objective of this specific mission was to rescue the members of the Epic Guild. Suddenly, a man approached them with a slick grin, commenting that the rescue department folks sure were working hard, even calling them darlings. Seo Yul thought to himself that there was always some audacious prick showing up to talk down to them like this. This man was Baek Jun-hwan, an executive from the mega guild Overcross. He was notorious for forcing small partner guild groups into gates completely irresponsibly, chasing nothing but pure profit without giving a single damn whether people lived or died. To Seo Yul, he was just a grumpy old bastard and the actual culprit behind countless emergency calls. In fact, he was probably the one to blame for this exact disaster too. Losing his patience, Seo Yul flatly warned him that they were in a rush, excused himself, and pushed forward toward the gate with his squad. Even so, Baek Jun-hwan kept pushing, mentioning that his guild could offer some assistance and asking if they were absolutely sure they didn't want the backup. Seo Yul knew the executive was the root cause of the problem and was only trying to cover his own ass to boost his reputation. Seo firmly shot him down, stating they didn't need any help and would simply do their jobs without relying on anyone else. Baek Jun-hwan merely sighed, muttering that it was a real pity. Meanwhile, on the inside of the gate, the environment was completely swallowed by an Inca jungle biome. A young girl was desperately trying to keep her ally alive using healing magic, but she quickly found herself cornered by monsters. Just as she was about to be ripped apart by one of the creatures, Seo Yul materialized out of nowhere, cleanly severing the monster's head with the tip of his spear. Immediately after, he calmed the terrified girl down, letting her know that the rescue team had arrived. The veteran hunter of the squad loudly warned that multiple ghouls were swarming the path they had just used to enter, meaning they would have to find an alternative exit. Knowing the stakes, Seo Yul immediately swung into action. He activated his silent wave skill and focused entirely on the surrounding audio, picking up faint noises that no ordinary human could hear. With this, he successfully mapped out the positions of all enemies and located a hidden trail for an alternate route. The moment he found the path, he hoisted the injured woman onto his ally's shoulders, and the entire group burst into a full sprint to escape. The young girl was completely paralyzed with fear, and even though she knew she wasn't in a position to complain, she asked if they were absolutely sure this path was safe. The veteran hunter replied with pure pride that even though their tracker was only a rank D, Seo Yul's actual skills were of the absolute highest tier. The veteran spoke with total confidence, but a little later, even he faltered, asking nervously if Seo Yul was certain about the route, because it looked like there were even more enemies lurking here than on the previous path. The horde of ghouls itself wasn't a massive threat, but the group was growing utterly exhausted from non-stop fighting while carrying the wounded. Seo Yul remained completely certain that this specific path would lead them straight to the exit. The real issue was that the enemies knew it too. Normal ghouls possessed zero intelligence, but the story changed completely when they were being micromanaged by a necromancer. Sensing the looming danger, Seo Yul activated his sixth sense. He became absolutely certain that someone nearby was manipulating the creatures. And sure enough, he was right. A dark magic circle erupted directly beneath their feet. Luckily, the majority of the group managed to sprint forward just in time to save themselves. Unfortunately, only Seo Yul and the veteran hunter were left behind, being violently dragged down by the pulling force of the necromancer's magic. Seeing the desperate situation, the veteran screamed at Seo Yul to leave him behind and save his own skin. Instead of running, the tracker delivered a sharp kick straight to his ally, shoving him entirely out of harm's way and completely isolating isolating himself inside the magical circle. With that final move, Seo Yul's movements were totally paralyzed. The veteran, losing his mind on the outside, begged him to hold on, promising he would find a way to break him out immediately. But Seo Yul fiercely rejected the help. He snapped his head toward the manager, a man named Li Han, and ordered them to get the hell out of there right now, because if they stayed, everyone would die. Seo Yul insisted that the manager take the victims and the rest of the squad to a secure location as fast as humanly possible. Swallowed by guilt, manager Li Han could only choke out an apology before retreating. Seo Yul yelled after him not to act like he was already dead, because he hadn't the slightest intention of dying today. Even while completely paralyzed and surrounded by circling ghouls, Seo Yul glared directly at the terrifying figure emerging before him. It was Karakul, the necromancer, and the boss of this dungeon. Seo Yul demanded to know if the monster had been playing a sick game with them from the very start. Karakul hissed back that this was precisely the plan, though he confessed the human boy had genuinely surprised him by being so remarkably good at running away. The monster then questioned how on earth Seo Yul managed to know the layout of this ancient temple just as perfectly as he did. Seo Yul snapped back, suggesting that if the monster left him alive, maybe he would actually share the secret. However, the necromancer scoffed with pure disdain, saying he had absolutely no reason to do that and would simply turn him into just another ghoul. At that exact instant, Seo Yul was struck by a devastating curse. His capacity for healing and regeneration was drastically diminished and completely cut off. Feeling his body slowly crumble to dust, he thought to himself that if he had just accepted the manager's help, maybe he would have made it out alive, or perhaps his fate would have been exactly the same. He reflected on how guild leaders and executives only ever cared about cold, hard cash and profit margins, instead of actually saving human lives. In a world overflowing with such selfish people, Seo Yul remembered the hero who had saved him in the past. That hero, because he was unable to save anyone else besides Seo Yul, had wept bitterly on that day. It was precisely because of that trauma and deep admiration that Seo wanted to become just like him, a dedicated department hunter, focused on protecting the weak. With that firm resolve locking into place, he absolutely refused to die in a dump like this. Once more, he forced his synesthesia and his sixth sense to their absolute limits, desperately trying to spot any clue or exit route that could save his life. That was when, deep within the temple, Seo Yul successfully detected a cracked monument glowing with an intense light. The system responded to his efforts, granting him direct access to the records of a hidden class. Meanwhile, the necromancer Karakul taunted him, saying the boy was struggling until the bitter end, but that he would put an end to his misery once and for all. The ghouls lunged forward to finish him off on the spot. Right at that split second, a system prompt popped up, asking if he would like to change his class to Dungeon Architect. In that final second, he obviously accepted the offer, since he had absolutely nothing left to lose. The very moment the transformation triggered, the tutorial officially began. He began to see countless fragments of that exact temple, flashing through various visions and totally different perspectives. Even Karakul couldn't comprehend what the hell was happening, because all of a sudden, that little piece of trash simply vanished into thin air. Seo Yul had indeed been transferred to a completely separate space. Now, staring directly at his system screen, he saw his information displaying Seo Yul, level 10, with a class change quest currently in progress. His stats were incredibly average: HP 80, Strength 17, Agility 20, Mana 30, and Physical Defense 16. He noticed that he still retained his synesthesia, his sixth sense, and his silent waves. He wondered if his old class, the Observer, was officially gone for good. The place he currently stood was, in reality, a tutorial zone for his brand new class. The system informed him that he had to utilize the map functions to slaughter 20 ghouls that had infiltrated the labyrinth, all within a strict time limit of 24 hours. The reward would be a permanent class change to Dungeon Architect, but the quest would be completely cancelled if he failed. Seo Yul understood the rest of the warnings, but he found himself wondering what those map functions actually were. The moment the words left his mouth, a 3D map hologram of the labyrinth materialized right in front of his face. The map was surprisingly easy to read. A bright green pointer represented his exact position, while the various red dots indicated the enemies scattered all around the labyrinth. He understood perfectly how the whole thing worked. If he used this map to hunt down the ghouls within a single day, he could successfully secure his new class. To some, it might have seemed like absolute madness to hunt down that many monsters in such a massive area in so little time, but for an experienced tracker like him, it was completely doable. So, he got straight to work. After all, why not give it a shot? The hunt turned out to be easy and fast. By the time he slaughtered the 16th ghoul, with only 30 minutes remaining on the clock, he leveled up. He had a mere 30 minutes left to kill the 4 remaining monsters, so he needed to be incredibly fast. The tutorial was turning out to be way more relaxed than expected in terms of difficulty. He was easily able to use the claws of the dead ghouls as weapons, relying on his mapping skill to carefully deal with every single one of them. He was hunting and killing the ghouls at a very comfortable pace. He was absolutely certain he could take care of everything within the stipulated time. That was, until he spotted that massive thing stalking him. It was a ghoul significantly larger than the others and completely different. The creature moved entirely on its own, pursuing Seo Yul through the labyrinth. He realized that not only would it take a massive amount of time to actually kill it, but he didn't even know if he was genuinely capable of pulling it off. But if he absolutely had to kill it, he would first need to get rid of the other monsters quickly to buy himself some time. Right at that moment, the big guy closed in. Except he didn't come alone. He showed up with the other 3 remaining ghouls from the map. Seo Yul was completely caught off guard. He never expected the creature to move in a pack, since up until that point, it had been wandering entirely by itself. In those final crucial minutes, he had neglected to look at the map, and because of that, he ended up trapped in this mess. He had made a textbook, ugly mistake. First, he rapidly reviewed his plan inside his head. To start, he could only handle 2 ghouls at a single time, meaning he had to get the hell out of there urgently. The massive problem was that he was completely surrounded. He would have to force his way through them, killing at least one on the path out. No matter how much he thought about it, the situation looked like total checkmate. Maybe this really was his limit as a rank D hunter. The situation had been ridiculous from the very start. Thinking about it, if this whole thing was just a tutorial to become a dungeon architect, he decided he might as well act like it was a real tutorial. So, he charged straight at them like an absolute madman, activating his 6th sense. This action caused him to discover a rotating block, connecting his 6th sense directly with the map interface. He didn't quite understand it at first, but when he analyzed the map with close attention, he saw there was literally a little hand icon prompting him to spin that specific wall. The moment he flipped the wall, he slipped onto the other side, leaving the ghouls completely locked behind him. This perfectly isolated one of the ghouls, and he instantly seized the opportunity to slaughter it. Seo Yul commented to himself that the feature was incredibly convenient and would help immensely in killing them off now, since there was still time left to complete the mission. He repeatedly used the wall spinning ability to constantly vanish and reappear, catching the enemies totally defenseless. When only the mutant giant was left, he caught it completely off guard too, plunging his knife with brute force deep into its neck. But even so, the monster resisted bravely. The creature clamped its sharp claws tightly onto Seo Yul's face, trying to crush him by any means necessary. But he successfully finished it off with his blade, declaring with absolute determination that he hadn't struggled all this way just to die here. The tutorial was finally complete, and Seo Yul successfully managed to change his class to Dungeon Architect. With this massive achievement, he acquired 2 unique profession-specific skills, King of the Dungeon and the Gate. Through the King of the Dungeon skill, any ghouls he defeated while it was active would be automatically incorporated as monsters of his very own dungeon. With that, his class change was officially finalized. In stark contrast to his success, on the outside of that exact same dungeon, manager Lee Han was frantically trying to run back inside to save Seo Yul. However, the other rescue squad members screamed at him to watch out, because right then, the gate simply vanished into thin air. They questioned where on earth the manager even expected to find Seo Yul in a situation like this. Right at that exact second, Seo Yul himself materialized, strolling out completely unbothered while holding a tiny umbrella and casually eating a popsicle. He looked at them and asked what they were all arguing about, smoothly suggesting that everyone should just grab a popsicle to celebrate completing the mission successfully. Later on, during a much more private moment, Seo Yul was thoroughly analyzing his The Gate skill. He understood that it allowed him to trap opponents inside his dungeon, and from the looks of it, this would be his main combat tool outside the labyrinth. It was a terrifying rank S skill, but it came with a massive high-stakes warning. Any trapped enemies could break out of the dungeon if they managed to defeat the boss, and if they actually pulled it off, they would become even stronger. Because of this brutal risk, Seo Yul realized he couldn't just recklessly trap opponents. The gate itself was completely invisible to other people, making it incredibly easy to snatch someone up and drag them inside. However, to survive the powerful enemies he would inevitably face down the road, he needed to pack his dungeon with high-tier monsters. Up until this point, his army consisted of nothing but basic ghouls, and to expand his forces, he would have to slaughter fresh enemies using the King of the Dungeon skill. During this period, he was waiting around for someone who finally made her return. Yun Hee. She brought over a bag completely stuffed with apples for him, casually mentioning that her house always had a massive surplus of fruit anyway. After all, they had been next-door neighbors for 5 whole years now. So Yul took the opportunity to ask how things were going at school and if everything was alright. Yun Hee replied, softly, that school was just the same old boring routine as always. Right at that exact moment, the two of them witnessed a sudden emergency breaking out in the immediate neighborhood. A completely hysterical woman was being dragged away from the scene because a dungeon break had just erupted. She was screaming and weeping uncontrollably because her young daughter was still trapped inside. As he analyzed the monolithic hotel towering right in front of him, Seo Yul knew instantly that this was a textbook dungeon break. This disaster occurs when a dungeon is neglected for far too long. The monsters inside eventually rupture the gate and cross over directly into the human world. He quickly apologized to Yun Hee, asking if he could grab the apples from her a bit later. Yun Hee agreed, but anxiously wanted to know what he was planning to do. Seo Yul was dead set on doing his job as a rescue hunter. He stepped right past the yellow isolation tape, flashing his official identification badge. One of the guards on site blocked his path, demanding to know why he was going in entirely alone. Seo Yul responded calmly that the rest of the rescue department would be arriving shortly, but he was heading in first. The guard fiercely insisted that he absolutely couldn't do that, warning warning him that a horde of red goblins was swarming inside and that going in without heavy backup was pure suicide. Seo Yul shot back, stating that was the exact reason he needed to get moving immediately. He explained that he heard there was still a child lost inside the hotel, and since the guild that was supposed to be locking down the perimeter hadn't even shown its face yet, he was going to handle it himself. He guaranteed he would be completely fine, and that, in reality, he wasn't alone at all. Originally, the gate at that hotel was supposed to be cleared by the Hyunwoo Guild, which was the massive corporation responsible for that specific district. Ordinary citizens used to put all their trust in these guilds to close gates so they could go about their daily lives in safety. However, these corporate guilds frequently neglected gates that weren't highly profitable. As a direct, ugly consequence of this greed, dungeon breaks happened constantly in low-rank gates, leading to massive civilian tragedies. The moment he stepped inside, Seo Yul was hit with a gruesome scene. Several hotel staff members lay dead right in the middle of the reception area. Aware of the looming danger, Seo Yul activated his sixth sense and commanded the monsters to quit hiding, announcing that he could already see where every single one of them was crouching and that he wanted to test out something new. Sure enough, the red goblins lunged forward in a highly coordinated ambush. Seo Yul reacted instantly by tearing open the gate. The goblins, who were still mid-air in their attack leaps, were violently sucked directly into the rift, landing straight inside Seo Yul's private dungeon where they were rapidly torn to shreds by the resident ghouls. In that moment, he was truly beginning to leverage the genuine potential of his new class. The red goblin was classified as a one-star monster, a species that always synchronized its movements around its leader. In almost every aspect, they weren't much different from ordinary goblins, except for one crucial detail: they were significantly smarter and pulled off far more effective ambushes. In fact, 3 goblins flung themselves together at the very first ghoul in the labyrinth, trying to bring it down by force. However, Seo Yul wasn't about to let that happen. He smoothly accessed his map functions and spun a wall, completely cutting off the advance of 2 of the goblins and isolating the third one to be dealt with by his ghoul. Seo Yul muttered to himself that these monsters were plotting a little trick. The second he stopped looking, he noticed that the goblins seemed to be rapidly adapting to the dungeon environment. Even so, he thought it was fantastic that the ghouls were doing the hunting for him, concluding it was pretty sweet not having to lift a finger. Nevertheless, since there were so many goblins flooding his dungeon, Seo Yul decided he would keep a very close eye on things. He thought that they could keep trying their little treacherous tricks all they wanted, because inside this dungeon, the monsters were the prey, and he was the ultimate predator. Eventually, Seo Yul made his way up to the 17th floor of the hotel and located the child, a little girl named Sumi. The kid was crying, completely paralyzed by pure terror, but he comforted her, saying he had already taken care of everything and that she could step out safely. On the way down, Sumi anxiously asked if the mister had really gotten rid of all the scary goblins. Seo Yul smiled and said yes, though he secretly thought to himself that technically the ghouls did all the heavy lifting, but since those creatures answered directly to him, the credit was still all his. He reflected on how, as he climbed the hotel, the goblins had been using their sharp sense of smell to track him down, constantly sniffing out any hidden humans. If Seo Yul hadn't shown up right when he did, little Sumi would have certainly been captured by them. Just before stepping into the elevator to head down, Seo Yul received a jarring, urgent system alert, informing him that roughly 50% of his dungeon defenders had just been completely wiped out. He gently ushered Sumi into the elevator, telling her that her mother was already waiting anxiously downstairs, and calmly let her know that he would have to stay behind just a little longer to clean up the rest of the bad guys. Checking the status of his dungeon, Seo Yul realized the goblins were causing serious trouble and had already wiped out half of his ghouls. At this rate, all his defenders would be dead soon. The reason for the slaughter was the Red Goblin King, who was currently commanding the battlefield with a devastating fireblade. Seo Yul could just let the Goblin King fight the boss of his own dungeon once and for all, but there was a massive risk that his boss might actually lose the match, which would make the situation even more problematic. Faced with this dilemma, and since he needed to check on something in there personally anyway, Seo Yul crossed the portal and stepped into his own dungeon. Right off the bat, he stumbled upon his dead ghoul guards, but he demanded they stop messing with his ghouls. Then, he literally flipped the wall and pulled the Goblin King away from the guards. Now, the two of them were standing face to face. Seo Yul summoned his blade, while the Goblin King swung his flaming sword right at him. The corridor was narrow, leaving barely any room to dodge. Because of that, Seo Yul kept dodging backward, creating more and more distance. Even so, his body felt way lighter compared to before. He had reached a new level thanks to his class. He was level 24 now, boasting 150 stamina, 45 strength, 40 agility, 90 magic, and 48 defense. He could genuinely feel the difference. He openly told the Goblin King himself that he had originally planned to just test things out and use the ghouls, but that he could handle this mess all on his own. Seo Yul's next strike actually fractured some of the Goblin King's bones. The monster retaliated by hurling the hunter far away, but the creature probably couldn't even wield its own sword, or any other weapon for that matter, since its arms were completely mangled. mangled. Now Seo Yul was in the perfect position. He assessed the situation and mocked the Goblin King, asking where all that energy from before went. He said if the monster was supposed to be the king of the gang, it should show a worthy performance, unless it was just scared prefixless chicken of him. The Goblin King went absolutely ballistic at the insult, poured even more fire into his blade, and charged straight ahead. The hunter just replied that the monster needed to be worth the investment. Suddenly, the spikes lining the ceiling came crashing down right on top of the Goblin King. All that was left of his body outside the trap was the single arm still clutching the blade. It cost 20 gold to install that trap, but it bore fruit and guaranteed results. Thanks to yet another kill and achievement, he leveled up. The squad of defeated red goblins, along with the Dungeon King, were now incorporated into his dungeon as well. When he stepped out of the hotel, he ran right into his manager. Seo Yul asked if he was there, and the manager replied, visibly irritated that he'd been there for a while, demanding to know what the hell he had done by himself. He wanted to know if Seo Yul was alright, and if it was true that he had taken care of the red goblins. Seo Yul played dumb, replying that he didn't remember very well because he had recently bumped his head. The manager shot back, saying that, honestly, everyone was whispering about how the goblins vanished right after he went in. The hunter joked that maybe he'd remember better if he could get some steak or Korean BBQ. But a man suddenly approached them, asking for forgiveness for the intrusion. He informed the rescue team that he was manager Kwon Sung-sun, representing the Han-Nu Guild. The rescue crew wasn't particularly thrilled to talk to a guild manager. First, he sincerely thanked everyone for their cooperation in resolving the dungeon break, but then he got straight to the point. He preferred that everyone abstain from interviews regarding the incident. The Han-Nu Guild didn't want the case spreading to the public. They were going to compensate the hotel for the damages, but if bad press got out, it would only make the citizens even more anxious. Naturally, they could make a generous donation to the department and would appreciate everyone's understanding. Seo Yul thought to himself that this was exactly how they silenced people, but the man wasn't entirely wrong. Unlike the hunter department, which was mostly made up of rank D hunters, the Han-Nu Guild had a massive variety, going all the way up to rank S. Because of that, people naturally placed more trust in guilds with more power, believing they were heroes saving others. The way these guilds exploited that trust made him seriously pissed off, but he knew that was reality, and he couldn't change it alone. He placed a hand on Kwon Sung-sun's shoulder, saying that of course he completely understood, while secretly thinking that he hadn't planned on making a big scene about it anyway. Even if he did, the situation would just be buried by the association, and drawing attention to himself wouldn't do any good. However, he mentioned that he wasn't sure how much the manager planned on donating, hinting that he might just have to keep cleaning up their messes. Seo Yul went totally honest and demanded 10 billion won to keep his mouth shut. Kwon Sung-sun gasped in absolute shock, stammering if it was really going to be 10 billion. The next morning, he was at the plaza, completely relaxed and sipping an iced tea. After dealing with that hotel dungeon break, he was granted 2 days off. He had solved practically the entire crisis by himself, and even secured cash from the guild. The only issue was that his co-workers were giving him weird looks, wondering if he was really the same Seo Yul, and how on earth the guy managed to handle a whole horde of red goblins by himself. But he had no reason to answer them. If news of his reawakening got out, things could get incredibly annoying. For now, he was just going to focus on managing his dungeon. First, he would use his gold to repair the dungeon walls and respawn the monsters. Currently, the durability was at 80 out of 150, nearly half. Repairing all the damaged blocks and walls would cost a total of 34 gold, and to revive a ghoul, 1 gold, 2 goblins, 1 gold, and 1 red goblin king, 3 gold. The gold coin was the universal currency for hunters. It was easy to calculate because it was the exact same currency across all dungeons. The problem was that it was insanely expensive to fix everything. 53 gold was equivalent to about 5.5 million won, which was almost double his salary. Still, since he had accumulated 80 gold so far, he should at least invest that little bit. But right then, he received a highly unwelcome phone call. It was a woman calling him right in the middle of his day off. He answered, stating he was off duty and told her to get straight to the point. On the other end was the department's lackey, who snapped back that she didn't care and commented that he was probably just slacking off at the park anyway. She said it was great that he was off because it meant he had plenty of time to use his skills, and asked if he could track someone down for her. This was Lee Jung-hae from the monitoring department. But he just went dead silent because he had pulled the phone away from his face. He began to think that he probably didn't need to recreate every single monster in the dungeon after all, and that he could cut down on his expenses a bit. If necessary, it would honestly be faster if he just stepped in and intervened personally, if it really came down to that. For God's sake, he flat out told the woman to shut her mouth right to her face, considering she had been rambling non-stop until that very moment. He told her that if she was from the monitoring department, she should track the person down on her own. Lee Jung-hae fired back, begging him politely and promising that she would buy him food. She questioned if that was really how he responded when a beautiful and delicate young lady was pleading with him. He asked, highly suspicious, about the beautiful and delicate part. Lee Jung-hae affirmed that she absolutely was, adding that as soon as he heard who the target was, he would want to look for him personally. She then revealed that it was Kang Tae-sun. Seo Yul confirmed the name and admitted that honestly, he would love to see him one more time. If the target was someone of that guy's caliber, he would find him in no time. Later on, he was still at the plaza, watching some old men play Go. Of course, he wasn't actually watching the game, he was just completely lost in thought. He could feel it from a distance, but up close, it was no joke. One of the old men had a dark red aura, the kind that only incredibly powerful awakened individuals possessed. But setting the aura aside, he wondered if it was really this guy, because he looked completely different from what he had imagined. He just looked like a regular old man. One of the elderly men asked Seo Yul if by any chance he knew how to play Jangi. He replied that yes, he knew a little bit. The old man asked if he had a tip to help him win right then and there. The moment he went to help, his sixth sense kicked in. An explosion rocked a tree in the background because the other old-timer had literally fired the Go pieces, blasting a crater right into the trunk. The first old man told him he could just ignore anyone who approached him with ulterior motives, but that was simply impossible. Seo Yul realized that it really was him, one of South Korea's only rank S hunters, a man notorious for turning absolutely anything in his hands into a deadly weapon. Kang Tae-san, the rank S hunter and master of weapons, spoke up, saying he couldn't just ignore the kid's useless backseat driving regarding the game. Right after that, however, Lee Jung-hae showed up to call for her master. Kang Tae-san asked if the brat was from the monitoring department. He answered no, that he was just a rescue tracker. Kang Tae-san remarked that he had pretty arrogant movements for a guide, commenting that the boy's only flaw was being entirely too talented. Lee Jung-hae asked where on earth he had been, since she had been looking for him everywhere. He merely replied that he just needed a moment. She answered that the trainees were already gathered and that he needed to get back. But then she asked Seyul how he had managed to find a person that even the department couldn't track down. He replied that he was just highly qualified, that's all, and that the job was done. But before he could leave, Kang Tae-sen asked where the arrogant punk was going, reminding him that he was also a hunter from the department. He ordered the boy to follow him, as he wanted to verify if he was actually as good as he seemed. Later at the department, the old man was lecturing that awakened individuals possess a fixed maximum capacity. This meant that no matter how hard a rank C tried, they would never escape being a rank C. However, the system didn't define everything. Martial arts couldn't be measured with numbers alone. He drew his sword and explained that, in other words, someone could become much stronger depending on their proficiency. That was exactly why everyone from the department was gathered there today. Except, one of the people standing up on the stage for the demonstration was Seo Yul. In reality, he didn't want to be there at all. Master Kang Tae-san asked one of the recruits how long he had been receiving his training. He answered that it had been 4 months. The people in the audience whispered that he was one of the department's few rank B guys. The master noted that he had potential, which was why he was standing there now. Then, he posed a question. What did the recruit think was necessary to wield a sword properly? The recruit answered that it required unstoppable strength and a complete understanding of one's own skills. Then, the master asked the arrogant brat what he thought. Seyul answered without hesitation that it was simply the will to wield a sword. A massive uproar broke out in the crowd because everyone thought his answer was absolute garbage. Kang Tae-san fired back, saying he had answered carelessly, but Seyul was completely certain of his answer, thinking to himself that the master, as expected, was remarkably sharp for a rank S. Kang Tae-san explained that for someone with such a careless expression, he truly was an arrogant boy, but that was indeed the correct answer. Naturally, the other apprentice got furiously irritated, demanding to know how that could possibly be the right answer, completely setting aside the fact that Seyul wasn't even an actual trainee and was just standing there. Seyul wondered why this guy was throwing such a tantrum over a single question, thinking he acted like a total child. Kang Tae-san cut in, stating that this was a place where anyone with the right qualifications could stand. He announced that he was going to deviate from his initial plan and give them both a test. They needed to prove their answers on him. The other disciple readily accepted. Seo Yul flatly replied, "No thank you, I'm not really feeling it." Kang Tae-san said that in that case, he had no choice but to go with the big young fellow as planned, but asked if he was absolutely sure. Passing this test meant becoming his direct disciple. Seo Yul quickly reconsidered. Becoming the disciple of a rank S would not only make him stronger, but it would also give him a golden opportunity to climb much higher. Kang Tae-san asked what the rookie thought now, if he felt prepared and if he was more motivated. He replied that he was more than motivated enough. Later, they were inside a closed arena, and the test was remarkably simple. They were going to utilize a skill passed down by Kang Tae-san himself to shatter as much of an ether stone as possible. Whoever managed to break the most would become his disciple. The ether stone was imbued with massive magical power and could only be found inside a temple. Seo Yul had heard that only incredibly powerful awakened individuals could shatter it. Even so, he wondered what the master meant by passing down a skill, and what kind of skill it would even be. Meanwhile, the big guy was soaking up the crowd's energy, asking for motivation and cheers from the department staff. Only Lee Jung-hae wasn't cheering. She simply couldn't comprehend the situation, or why Seo Yul was even standing there. But he thought to himself that, regardless, this was his big shot. Master Kang Tae-san announced that he would now pass down his skill. He warned them that of course, if they didn't feel anything at all, they should keep in mind that they would be disqualified immediately. At that exact moment, he unleashed his terrifying sword aura, leaving the two poor rookies completely unable to even breathe properly. Apparently, Seo Yul had to endure this overwhelming pressure just to perceive the skill. He felt his consciousness literally fading away, but at the very end of it all, deep within the recesses of his mind, he sensed something and managed to see a vision. He saw a spear and successfully acquired the skill. He had conquered the Serene Mind and the Dragon King's spear. The old man mentioned that, judging by their expressions, the two of them certainly had what it took to learn the skill. Both of them were utterly spent, their faces masks of pure agony and completely catatonic. Most of the regular folks who were there just to watch had fainted. Then Kang Tae-san asked who would prove themselves first. The big guy immediately took a step forward. He wielded his two-handed greatsword, thinking to himself that he would now crush the motivation of the punk who dared to challenge him. To him, all this talk about willpower was complete horse manure. He also thought the kid had been suspicious ever since he walked in with the old man, unable to fathom how a rank D could have resisted the skill inheritance, concluding that the guy had simply bought his way in. The big guy's strike with the skill ripped a massive chunk out of the ether stone. The crowd around them wondered how he broke it so easily, commenting that if he was that strong, he shouldn't even be in the department. Kang Tae-san remarked that the boy had managed to master the Dragon King's spear, which was good. Then, the big guy brushed past Seo Yul, muttering that he wouldn't be able to steal his spot no matter what. Seo Yul fired back, asking what kind of pathetic little life he was living, being afraid of a rookie and walking on eggshells forever. The master told them to stop bickering and announced that it was now the rookie's turn once and for all. Seo Yul thought to himself that he only retaliated because the guy had been getting on his nerves, but he acknowledged that his opponent really was quite powerful in terms of raw strength. However, using that skill wasn't solely a matter of muscle. It was a test to prove each person's individual answer. Furthermore, Master Kang Tae-san had stated that his answer was the correct one, the will to wield a weapon. It was true that he had given that answer casually, but that was because it was exactly his truth. He asked himself why he carried a weapon to this very day, why he was part of the rescue department, why he slaughtered monsters, why he always remembered that specific person who saved him, and why he kept saving people. These were all separate questions, yet every single one answered the core reason of why he carried a weapon. That was why he became a hunter, to achieve his goal as well. He needed to get stronger. He unleashed the Dragon King's spear, the heart-piercing strike, and when they witnessed the sheer devastation he caused to the ether stone, everyone was utterly shocked. Kang Tae-san didn't seem to react, but the veteran from earlier gasped, "What the actual hell is that?" So Yul had simply annihilated the stone. The master offered an apology to Gyun-soo, saying it looked like his junior was going to steal his position. The master explained that weapons and skills were mere tools, and no matter what weapon someone held, they must first know themselves to unleash its true power. He accepted So Yul and declared that, from that day forward, he was his disciple. For some reason, Seo Yul's childhood friend and neighbor, Yun-hee, was getting beaten up in the street by some people from her school. The handsome bully sneered that she should have left when he told her to, and that this happened because she didn't listen to him. A little smoker girl chimed in that, as a classmate, it truly broke her tiny heart. She commented that dear Yun-hee would end up this way just for being a busybody, asking if she really wanted to help her friend that badly. Even so, the girl slapped Jin-tae across the face, saying that wasn't a nice thing to do. Jin-tae himself scoffed that it was a pity, because now she had no friends left to help her. Her friend had jumped off the building of her own free will and was currently hospitalized, so he asked what she was going to do about it. Yun-hee only glared back with a furious expression, which was just another excuse for him to strike her again. But suddenly, someone serving Jin-tae, a rank B hunter who addressed him as young master, approached them. Jin-tae stated that he was leaving right then and ordered them to take care of the girl there so she wouldn't run away, telling the rank B to come along with him too. The hunter asked where they were heading, and he replied that it was obviously to an empty place where they could play until their hearts were content. Oblivious to this, Lee Jung-hae was telling Seo that it must be awesome since he became the disciple of a rank S hunter, and the master even let him choose a weapon for free. Seo did exactly that, and picked up the Loga, the Spear of Evolution. It had a measly 50 durability, but its unique effect was that it could evolve into a form that aligned with the user's will. Lee Jung-hae mentioned that they had so many bizarre events that day, and commented that it was already past her clock-out time as well. Seo asked what she meant by work, questioning if that was what she actually called what she did inside the department. However, right outside, there was someone frantically looking for Seo Yul. She was being blocked by security, but he appeared himself and asked if something was wrong. The woman replied that yes, it was. She was Yeonhee's mother, and blurted out that her daughter had been dragged off to the yellow zone. He immediately demanded to know who did it. Meanwhile, inside a dungeon that resembled a forest, Jin-tae's friends asked if it was really okay for them to go in there. He replied that it was fine, asserting that he hadn't brought a rank B hunter with them for nothing. What he really wanted to see was the little girl fighting against a monster, and he asked if Yun-hee was scared. He told her they were just weakling monsters, and that if she fought with the same conviction she used when she hit him, she would win super easily. At that moment, she broke free and tried to bolt, but Jin-tae just ordered the hunter to catch her. Yun-hee knew that he would absolutely force her to fight, because the guy was insane. Jin-tae was a total psychopath. It made sense why he had caused trouble with her friend in the first place, but her escape was abruptly cut short by the rank B, who simply stuck his foot out to make her crash to the ground. She screamed for help, but there was absolutely no one else around. The first creatures closed in, and the B-rank hunter got into position. explosion. Even so, the monster's projectiles hit the little smoking girl, and she died right then and there. A blade pierced straight through her heart, and the B-rank hunter told his young master that they needed to head back immediately. Jintei asked what kind of shit was that, and the hunter replied that they were stinghawks, giant insects that operated just like massive killer wasps. So Yul was already inside as well, and thanked his friend for accepting the request. He had heard that it was this friend who told the boss where Yunhee was, and Jungmin, from the combat department, replied that he was just doing his job, which was filing a report on a personal mission. He also warned So Yul to be careful, and the hunter fired back that he had nothing to worry about. But either way, the place looked terrible. The yellow tape marked an isolated zone where the area had spiraled completely out of control after a dungeon break. The monsters in that zone weren't all that strong, but they were incredibly smart. They had adapted to the horrific environment of the place and were using it to their advantage. Yul had already slaughtered several monstrous insects, but they just kept on coming. Even so, they seemed way weaker than the red goblins. However, if a person wasn't an awakened, surviving there would be a nightmare, so he rushed forward to save Yunhee. But midway there, even more insect hordes showed up. So he finally retaliated using his portal, revealing exactly what the goblins were doing to the insects inside, and taunted the monster horde, telling them they could call as many of their little friends as they wanted. The wasp horde did exactly that, and summoned a massive swarm of friends. They all lunged straight at Seo Yul, who initially thought about making a run for it, since things were starting to look a little dicey. For now, the dungeon monsters were beginning to thin out significantly. If he pushed any more insects in there, the dungeon would definitely collapse. But on the outside, there were still too many enemies to handle. His absolute last resort was this. Seo Yul summoned the portal, sucking the insects right inside, and then plunged the portal underwater. This ended up drowning every single insect trapped within. The bag turned completely filthy and disgusting. Staring at that whole mess of insect remains, blood and water, Seo Yul admitted that it was going to be a hell of a job to repair the dungeon all over again. But hey, the method worked, and the place became significantly quieter. That was on his side, of course, because the folks from that complicated little school were still running for their lives from the wasps. Jintei barked out, asking why they were still being chased. He questioned whether the hunter was really a B rank, why he couldn't handle these stupid bugs, and why on earth he was running away. The hunter replied that there were just too many of them, and if he stopped to fight, the young master would end up in serious danger. Jintei snapped back, saying he was already fed up with this whole situation, demanding to know if he now had a completely useless B rank by his side. His other friend also had his legs slashed and was ultimately mutilated by the insects. Finally, the hunter stopped to face the monsters head on. Naturally, the monsters seized that exact opening to attack Yunhee and Jintei, but out of nowhere, another hunter materialized and slaughtered the insects. Jintei demanded to know who did that, and Seyol replied that it was just him, a little watchdog from the department. Jintei cursed at him and claimed he was the one who dragged Yunhee there in the first place. At that very moment, she ran over and hugged Seyur, crying eyes out. He noted that it was the first time he had ever seen her cry. Jintei told the department hunter that he knew the way out, so he was going to take them and lead them straight to the exit. Yunhee begged Seyur to just ignore him, sobbing that she just wanted to get out of there. Seoyol apologized to her, and in the next split second he knocked her unconscious with a quick strike, explaining that he would wrap this up quickly and take her home. Jintei yelled, asking what the hell he thought he was doing. Seoyol flatly replied that he did that to her because this was something she would absolutely hate to witness. Jintei barked, asking if he had any idea who he was dealing with. Seoyul retorted that, as a department hunter, it was impossible not to recognize his pathetic face. Park Jintei, the Supreme Court Justice's son, deeply involved in school violence, theft, driving under the influence, and pretty much every dirty thing you could think of. He had committed multiple crimes and paid his way out of every single one because his daddy was a judge. Jintei challenged him, asking what he was going to do about it, but while he was still running his mouth, he took a brutal kick straight to the shin and dropped to his knees. Seiyul sneered, asking if it must be real nice to buy your way out of everything with cash, and sarcastically suggested that maybe he should try buying him off right now, to avoid getting beaten to a pulp. Before he could do anything else, already clutching Jintei by the collar, Seiyul was cut off by that hunter serving the rich brat. Jintei smugly bragged that it was way too late to beg for mercy now, and that he could never beat a B rank, and honestly the long gray-haired man was incredibly fast and lethal with his knife. But Seoyul managed to deflect every single strike with his spear, stating that he was going to let it slide with just a warning, but his opponent had officially crossed the line. Since they tried to murder him first, this was strictly self-defense. He countered with a massive, heavy blow that, even though it was blocked, blasted the B-rank hunter right backward. The man internally panicked, wondering why he was being completely overwhelmed by a mere department hunter. If Seoyul were a B rank, he would have recognized him, so he concluded he must be a lower rank. The real problem was that the B rank was wielding a thin, lightweight sword, while Seoyul was utilizing a spear, which boasted a much longer reach. The B rank desperately tried to close the gap to strike, but Seoyul grabbed him by the throat with one fist and absolutely leveled him with the other, knocking the opponent down almost instantly. Jintei fell into absolute despair, while Seoyul looked down, genuinely wondering if that weakling was actually a B rank. He thought to himself that maybe he had boosted his own stats lately without even realizing it, and that perhaps he was sitting comfortably at a B rank level right now. For some strange reason, that idiot Jin-tae actually thought he could just pick up a rock and ambush Se-yul from behind, which obviously didn't work out for him. With just a single swift pivot of his spear, the brat was slammed flat onto the ground. Se-yul looked down and asked him how it felt, pointing out that a privileged punk like him had probably never been thrashed like this before, whereas the innocent people he had mercilessly tormented for all this time suffered infinitely more. Jin-tae spat back that if he had a problem with the way things were, he should have obtained power or money himself, because that is exactly how the world works. Se-yul nodded along, agreeing that he used to think the exact same way, but then added that the world would be a much better place without a hopeless piece of shit like him in it. Jin-tae nervously asked what he was planning to do, and Se-yul told him not to worry, because he wasn't feeling overly ambitious anyway. If he could just make a piece of human trash like him suffer a sufficient amount, that would be more than enough. So, he picked Yunhee up in his arms and bluntly announced that he was going to leave Jin-tae behind to fend for himself, since, after all, the bastard had plenty of power and money to back him up. When he was left behind in the dark, the dungeon monsters obviously closed in and devoured Jin-tae alive. And just like that, the harrowing kidnapping of Yunhee inside the yellow tape zone finally came to an end, and she was at long last reunited with her family. Jung-min, Se-yul's reliable friend, was waiting for him outside. He reported that the higher-ups had successfully tracked down the corrupt officials who allowed Jin-tae to enter the restricted area in the first place, and they had officially purged the corrupt elements from the department. Things got incredibly chaotic. While those crooked officials were being disciplined, the news of the incident spread through the community like wildfire. Eventually, the entire scandal was swept clean with the forced resignation of the Supreme Court Justice himself, Park Bun-jin. Suddenly, the system pinged, and Se-yul received a brand new elimination quest: hunt down the Queen Wasp, the absolute pinnacle of the wasp swarm, within a strict 30-day time limit. If he successfully defeated her, he would secure various high-tier items along with a massive bonus of 100 gold as a reward. However, if he failed the quest, his overall combat performance against insect-type monsters would permanently plummet by 50%. The moment Se-yul had walked out of that dungeon with Yunhee, he had actually stood face-to-face with the Queen Wasp herself, but he chose to ignore the monster and avoided engaging in combat at that time. But this time around, he was going to get it done. He knew for a fact that the mere worker wasps possessed enough raw power to trigger a dungeon break, so their queen had to be vastly more powerful. After that, he said goodbye to the department staff, letting them know he had something urgent to take care of that day and would be leaving early. The manager replied that it was truly great to see him so active lately, but quickly asked if he had finished his mounting paperwork. Se-yul responded with absolute silence and just walked right out the door. No, he had definitely not finished that paperwork. He had exactly 1 month before the Queen Wasp quest expired, and the longer he dragged his feet, the more that monstrous swarm would expand its territory. This meant he needed to ensure he was completely and utterly prepared. For that exact reason, he went straight to meet up with his master to begin his intense training. Upon entering that deeply traditional ancient temple, Se-yul was required to change into a formal kimono. He curiously asked if he had truly become his direct disciple now, or if this whole setup was just a temporary test to motivate the rest of the crew. The master confirmed that it was official, but sternly warned him not to let it go to his head, as there were still 2 senior disciples ranked above him. Furthermore, the sheer volume of grueling training waiting ahead of him was absolutely monumental. The master gave him a tour to introduce the facility, and Se-yul was formally greeted by Gun-soo, who was obviously glaring at him with heavy suspicion. And honestly, it made perfect sense, since this new guy had just dropped out of thin air and taken a coveted spot. Later on, Master Kangtae-san pulled out the severed head of a creature and explained that it was the jawbone of an iron demon, a highly unique variant monster. He revealed that this specific beast was the very first thing that had ever come close to killing him. Se-yul's initial task was deceptively simple. Utilizing immense raw strength, the master demonstrated by effortlessly forcing the creature's iron jaw wide open, and when he finally let go, the massive jaw snapped back together with an incredibly violent thud. Gun-soo chimed in immediately, exclaiming that, as expected of the master, he truly was an unbelievable martial arts god. Meanwhile, Se-yul silently thought to himself that the old man was on a completely different level and possessed an absurd amount of strength. The master then turned to him and said it was now Se-yul's turn to give it a shot. Se-yul thought that he should at least be able to pry it open by a single centimeter. After all, he had recently reached the power level of a B-rank hunter. He strained with every single ounce of muscle in his body, but the master looked completely unimpressed, because the heavy mechanism didn't budge even a fraction of a millimeter. Kangtae-san calmly explained that this specific training was designed to build up his fundamental physical strength, so he simply had to keep trying day in and day out until he succeeded. But no matter how hard Se-yul stood there straining, the object refused to move even a single inch. Watching this pathetic display, Gun-soo thought to himself that his suspicions were entirely correct. The kid had clearly crawled his way into the temple through pure, unadulterated nepotism, which was an absolute shame for their legacy. Bright and early, the very next morning, Gun-soo found himself reflecting on his journey. It had already been 2 long years since he first joined the Martial Arts Association. He had worked significantly harder than anyone else in the building, just to prove he was worthy of becoming a direct disciple. Yet, in the end, some random guy walks in from the street and snatches the position away. No matter how he looked at the situation, he just couldn't see it as fair. But the moment he walked into the main hall, the rookie, Seo Yul, was already there training intensely in the dim morning light. Seo Yul warmly welcomed his senior, bowing deeply to show proper respect. Gyeomsu noted dryly that he was up incredibly early for a newcomer. He politely responded that even on his days off, he felt the need to stay on top of his routines, and kindly added that the veteran should feel free to speak casually with him from now on. Gyeomsu wasn't entirely convinced by the friendly act, but he suddenly noticed that the wooden floorboards were practically glowing. He asked if he was the one who had cleaned the entire dojo. Seo Yul smiled, still holding a mop in his hand, and replied that the place looked a bit dusty, so he figured he would clean it up. Gyeomsu told him to stop doing that immediately, commenting that it made the rest of them look incredibly lazy when a direct disciple was running around doing basic household chores. Seo Yul tilted his head and asked if it was truly necessary to maintain a rigid hierarchy for simple things like this, explaining that he merely had some free time and wanted to be productive. He stated that just because he held the title of a direct disciple, it didn't mean he was above doing service chores for the community. They were all there for the exact same purpose, to become stronger, and that was the only thing that truly mattered. He added that fulfilling chores was simply the mark of a diligent person, and he deeply desired to be diligent. But to Gunsu, this humble attitude made him seem extremely annoying. Over the course of the next 2 weeks, Seyol returned every single day, arriving before dawn and staying until late into the night to train. He continuously attempted to pry open the demon's jaw, but failed every single time. Despite holding the prestigious rank of direct disciple, he never once abused his authority, never looked down on a single person, and genuinely got along with absolutely everyone in the temple. On top of that, he trained like an absolute madman. This reality left Gunsu feeling even more infuriated, because, when it came down to it, Seo Yul was exactly the kind of person he had always desperately wished he could be. And on that day, Seo Yul almost managed to open the jaw mechanism, and the guys cheered him on. Gunsu himself showed up with a water bottle, telling him not to overdo it. He replied that it took quite a while just to drop the formalities with him. Suddenly, an alarm blared through the area. Gunsu explained that it was the mobilization signal for the Overcross Guild, since they were heading to a nearby dungeon, and it had to be today. Seo Yul asked if it really had to be right at that moment, and Gensu replied that Overcross works around the clock and that they are extremely dedicated. He mentioned he used to work for them, so he knew exactly how things operated. Meanwhile, inside the portal, the Overcross mobilization team had already wrapped everything up with extreme speed. They managed to capture the Steel Blood Orc. One of the hunters explained to those who were doubtful that this monster would fetch at least 12 billion won on the market. Since guild money doesn't grow on trees, they were going to sell it. The only problem? The orc had no intention of just sitting still. And at the end of another workday for the rescue department, the manager said they were all done there and asked if Seo Yul was heading back already. He said yes. The manager even tried to convince him to join the team dinner, but Seo Yul wasn't going. He was way too focused on his training. But suddenly, another alarm pierced the air, requesting emergency support for all available teams. A 3-star class boss monster that was being illegally transported had broken free and gone into a wild rampage. The location was none other than the Martial Arts Association. Several of the disciples managed to flee in time, but the Overcross crew wasn't so lucky. Gunsu stayed behind to hold off the creature, which happened to be that gigantic orc. Gonso thought to himself that ever since joining Overcross, he truly considered himself a genius and a prodigy. He used to justify it by telling himself that exploiting sub-guilds was just the natural right of the strong. But then he realized he was being exploited too. He was nothing more than another disposable pawn. One day, he was just left behind to die. It was only then that he realized just how cruel this world really is. Even so, he didn't want to believe the world was completely rotten because someone had saved his life. And now, he wanted to be the kind of person who helps others too. He raised his broken sword against the orc, so the remaining disciples could escape. His legs were giving out, but he endured, thinking he would buy them time, even if it was just for a single minute. But then, something crashed through the ceiling. Seiyu landed square on top of the creature, telling Gunsu to leave the rest to him. He dragged it into his own dungeon, and a bit later, he was being chased through the corridors by that exact same gigantic orc. Honestly, it was way more monstrous than Seiyu had anticipated. It was the Iron Blood Orc, and it was tearing through the labyrinth walls like a runaway freight train. It truly deserved its title as a unique orc. Defeating it alone was going to be tough. Because of that, Seo Yul shifted the walls and summoned every single creature inside the labyrinth. As the monsters launched themselves at the orc, he figured he would strike at the very first opening. But there was no opening. The Iron Blood Orc completely obliterated every single monster around it with just a single strike. The total ally count plummeted from 35 down to 29. Seo Yul snapped, asking if the monster had any idea how long it takes to clean that up. He realized normal monsters weren't anywhere near enough to create a breakthrough. He didn't want to use that because of the sheer risk involved, but the steel trap would at least allow him to gather more hardened blood. In one swift move, move, he summoned the boss of this dungeon, Kiori, the gigantic ghoul. The two behemoths began trading brutal, heavy blows, and Seo Yul actually found his opening, driving his spear straight into the orc's head. But when the monster felt the agonizing pain from the strike, it went wild and completely crushed the dungeon boss Kiori, defeating him instantly. A system notification popped up, informing him that due to the defeat of the boss, monster respawning was temporarily unavailable. Seo Yul grumbled that, because of the orc, his boss monster had just gone up in smoke. So, he activated the first trap, which drove several massive needles deep into the orc's skin. Right after, Seo Yul landed another spear strike, slamming the enemy to the ground and crushing him with the spikes descending from the ceiling. Seo Yul muttered that he had stacked multiple traps in this area for a reason, and thank goodness he did. The system warned him that the dungeon's durability was currently at 72%. It would naturally dissolve if the durability dropped below 60%, or if all monsters were eliminated. The orcs seemed to be celebrating their victory, and Seo Yul thought to himself that losing a boss was a heavy blow. Still, he knew he would have been completely screwed if it weren't for him. Of course, he just had to jinx it. At that exact second, the orc revealed itself to be alive. The creature shielded itself with its steel blood, crawled out from under the spikes, and triggered its final phase. Seo Yul didn't want to break his own dungeon, so he used the portal to warp them both right back into the real world. Gainsu was still trying to escape, wondering where on earth Seo Yul had gone. Since the moment he attacked the orc, both of them had simply vanished into thin air. And speak of the devil, Seo Yul dropped right back through the portal, landing dead center in the training yard. He used his spear to block a barrage of heavy swings from the steel blood orc. He thought about how he was supposed to be completely exhausted right now, not even capable of keeping up with the monster's devastating strikes. But his training had paid off, and those 2 weeks hadn't been in vain. He wasn't overwhelmingly powerful yet, but he was significantly stronger than before. He was still in too much pain to properly stand, but this time, he landed a clean, solid hit right in the orc's stomach. The creature finally coughed up blood right onto Seo Yul's spear, but the enemy immediately retaliated, grabbing the spear and hurling Seo Yul far across the yard. He realized he wouldn't pierce that steel blood so easily, but then he noticed he had landed right next to the iron demon's jaw. When the orc charged forward, Gonsu slashed at the creature's arm to buy some time, but he ended up getting slammed into the ground yet again. Seo Yul seized the opening, grabbed the demon's jaw, and delivered a direct hit that shattered part of the monster's blood helm. The orc was left completely vulnerable. Seo Yul pried the massive jaw wide open and clamped it shut right on the orc's head, devouring it whole and exploding the enemy's skull in a burst of blood. Upon killing the boss, he obtained a new item, a demonic dagger. He thanked the jaw mechanism, noting that, thanks to it, he was finally ready to move on to the next step of his training. Right at that moment, Gyunsu was looking back at the past, remembering the time he had been left behind to die. He thought of the exact person who had saved him back then, and suddenly, he found himself looking right at Seo Yul. He couldn't quite tell if the young man was that very same person from his past, or if he was just confusing him with someone else. But Seo Yul was saving him right now, and that was all that truly mattered. The whole situation had finally blown over. The next day, at the department headquarters, a massive swarm of journalists and reporters were aggressively trying to interview Baek Junhwan, the director of the Overcross Guild. They were grilling him about the incident, demanding to know if he would admit to the illegal transportation of monsters. Baek Junhwan, putting on a show for the cameras, started by offering his sincere apologies to the victims. However, he smoothly claimed that the steel blood orc was a monster of immense research value, and they had only captured it because they intended to donate it to the department, despite the risks involved. He stated he couldn't comment any further at the moment and was fully cooperating with the monitoring department's investigation. But he wasn't the media's only target. As Seo Yul walked past the journalists, they swarmed him too, throwing rapid-fire questions about the incident and asking how a mere rank D hunter managed to take down such a creature. Fortunately, his manager quickly pulled him away from the crowd. Even so, one of the reporters shouted out, asking if the department's response wasn't completely inadequate. He argued that the department exists solely to monitor and coordinate major guilds to prevent disasters exactly like this one, questioning if the department itself shared the blame. Seo Yul muttered to himself, wondering what kind of absolute garbage this man was spewing. His manager told him to just ignore it, explaining that the guy was obviously just a sellout who took money from a few guilds to post biased clickbait content, and that giving him an answer would mean playing right into his hands. But Seo Yul decided to confront this biased YouTuber anyway. He walked up and asked if the man was currently live, warning him that he was about to say something and wanted everyone to listen very carefully. He asked the guy if it felt good to take dirty money just to wipe the guild's asses, especially since the department is constantly cleaning up the massive messes their executives leave behind, straight up questioning if he thought that was right. Director Baek Junhwan didn't say a word, responding only with a deeply threatening glare. But right after that outburst, Seo Yul was dragged away by his manager, literally pulled by his hair. Baek Junhwan watched them go, asking his subordinates if that was the same little brat who had barely even acknowledged him before. He muttered that a newborn pup truly doesn't know enough to fear a tiger, coldly ordering his right-hand man to take care of that little piece of trash. The biased YouTuber's video went live, and the second second it dropped, news articles regarding Supervisor Seo Yeol flooded every single media outlet. Back at the office, the manager admitted he knew the kid had spoken out of turn, but he firmly argued that any official disciplinary action would be completely overkill. He defended Seo Yeol, stating that the major guilds were clearly the ones at fault here, and that it was painfully obvious these videos were staged, pointing out that there were also countless articles online thanking him for his actions. However, Koo Hunk, the chief of the monitoring department, snapped back, saying that whether it was staged or not, people were talking about it everywhere, and their only choice left was to punish him somehow. The manager fired right back, saying that if anyone deserved punishment, it should be Overcross, or the people who were actually supposed to be managing them. Koo Hunk sneered, asking if the manager was calling him incompetent, and if he was calling his entire team incompetent. Manager Lee Han didn't back down, asking if that wasn't exactly the case, which made Koo Hunk completely lose his temper, asking if he had completely lost his mind. But a high-ranking veteran sitting in the room spoke up, declaring that enough was enough. He turned to manager Lee Han and asked if it was true that the boy possessed a flawless 100% rescue success rate. The manager stood tall and replied, "Yes, sir." The superior noted that he was a rare talent they simply couldn't afford to lose. He pondered that, while they realistically have to rely on the help of major guilds, they still must maintain the department's dignity. Since the guilds made an interesting opening move, if they couldn't strike back in kind, they should at least give them a proper response. This man was Kwang Soo, the high director of the department. Later on, Seo Yeol was called in directly by the director himself. After all, there was a highly important matter to discuss. Taking a slow sip of his tea, the director started by asking Seo Yeol that if he were to retake his rank evaluation test today, what rank did he honestly think he would land? Seo Yeol replied that he wasn't entirely sure which one, but it would absolutely be higher than his current status. The director smiled, noting that lately, the kid had pulled off feats that a rank D could never dream of achieving. He added that the boy must know things have been difficult for the higher-ups too, since there was no shortage of people trying to dig up dirt on him. Seo Yeol wondered where on earth he was going with this, questioning if the director was subtly telling him to spill his secrets. The department director was a master politician who had held his powerful position for years, and manager Lee Han had already warned Seo Yeol to just be completely honest and humble with him, because trying to play mind games would only screw him over even worse. Seo Yeol followed that advice for the moment, but he still hesitated, wondering if it was truly alright to mention his unique dungeon. The director told him not to worry, reassuring him that he wasn't going to ask how he became so powerful out of nowhere. All that mattered was that the department desperately needed his strength. With that out of the way, the director got straight to the point and announced that he was sending him out to the countryside. For some reason, Junhwan was also hanging around the department, and he pulled coordinator Siwoo aside, asking what he truly thought about Seo Yeol. Coordinator Siwoo replied that he didn't know much since they worked in completely different divisions, but questioned why Junhwan suddenly cared so much about an ordinary rescue team member. Junhwan scoffed, saying there was nothing more irritating than an annoying pest right in front of your eyes. The coordinator immediately caught on and asked if that was the real reason he was pulling strings to exile the young man to the countryside. Junhwan sharply warned the coordinator to watch what he was saying, calmly explaining that he simply wanted the boy to have plenty of quiet time to reflect on himself. At that exact moment, Seo Yeol himself entered the room, casually asking if the two of them had always been this close. Junhwan smirked and said that his assistant manager Siwoo still seemed a little distracted, mentioning that he had heard a rumor that the boy was going to be sent to the countryside. He demanded to know if it was true. Seo Yeol shot back with another question, asking how Siwoo already knew about it when the official transfer documents hadn't even been processed yet, questioning whether he had been secretly spying on the department's affairs. Seo Yeol told him not to worry, since it was only a temporary 6-month assignment. Junhwan laughed at the situation, calling him incredibly naive, reminding him that the department normally only sends people at department head level or higher there, mocking him by asking if he truly believed he belonged in that rank, and telling him it was time to face reality. But Seo smiled and replied that he had simply been waiting for the right moment to announce that he had been promoted, and he was now officially a senior officer, a huge double promotion. Naturally, both of them froze completely in shock. Seo looked at their stunned expressions and chuckled, commenting that, judging by their faces, they didn't seem exactly happy about the news, jokingly asking if they had been hoping for his downfall. Junhwan forced a smile and replied that of course it was fantastic news, but muttered that he was just wondering whether the department had started handing out high-ranking promotions on a whim. Seo confidently responded that it wasn't that at all. The department was simply desperate to keep someone as talented as him. Seo Yeol knows that Junhwan is completely furious because things didn't go according to his plan, but honestly, he couldn't care less. The two exchange tense glances for a moment. Siwoo demands to know what they are still doing there, and informs director Baek Junhwan that it's time to leave. The director nods, admitting he got a little distracted, and leaves together with Siwoo. But Seo Yeol throws one final piece of advice toward the older man, telling him that trying to ruin him by changing his work location was a huge mistake, because no matter where they send him, his job remains exactly the same. When Seo leaves, Junhwan punches the wall, completely shattering part of it, and growls that these damn pests just keep appearing. Meanwhile, Back in the director's office, the man reflects on the conversation he had with Seo Yul. At the time, he had told the boy not to worry, explaining that while it might look like a demotion or exile on the surface, it's really just a 6-month deployment. Of course, he'll need to deliver results, as that's the only way to keep them from getting to him. Seo Yul had responded by thanking him for looking out for him, but made one specific request. Since he was going to be sent away regardless, he'd appreciate it if the director sent him somewhere that actually genuinely needed his help. The director couldn't believe the kid was saying something like that given the situation, thinking to himself that, man, this kid is truly worth every penny. Later on, seeing the official announcement, the members of the rescue department are left scratching their heads, wondering how this is even possible since Seo Yul became a senior officer in a single day. One of the members asks if Lee Han already knew about it. He fires back that of course he did. After all, he's the manager. The group's real anxiety was handling rescues without Seo Yul around, but manager Lee Han tells them that they're just going to do their jobs, same as always. Either way, the manager lets them know the punk got a week off before deploying and orders them to call him up so he can join the team dinner. One of the men grumbles, who on earth goes to a team dinner on their day off? But when they call Seo Yul, he's a bit tied up. His friend asks if he's doing homework, and he replies that it's something like that. He's currently clearing out a hornet's nest. Seo Yul is right in the middle of his extermination quest, where he has to eliminate the queen of the hornet swarm, and he only has 3 days left to pull it off. He hangs up, thinking that he thought he moved fast, but the queen managed to mass-produce soldier hornets at an insane speed. Then again, that doesn't really matter, as long as he can still move. In the end, he just needs to kill the queen. Except, as he charges forward, he is abruptly stopped by a barrage of steel bullets. It's a specific type of hornet that fires its stingers like actual bullets. Since this creature burns a massive amount of energy to create them, the queen usually avoided this type of attack, which means they must have been prepared well in advance. If he wastes any more time, he's going to end up completely surrounded. So Seo Yul hurls his portal. He can deal with these creatures by utilizing the dungeon's traps, and the portal will force them to lose their balance. Seo Yul seizes the opening to blitz through the entire forest. Various types of hornets lunged straight at him, and he notices that the enemy's behavior pattern has shifted. Some of the hornets are purposefully clinging to the ground to keep from getting sucked into the portal. But then, she emerges. The creature that had been watching Seo Yul from the very beginning, the Hornet Queen. He feels a bit flattered. The queen is throwing absolutely everything she has at him to kill him, but unfortunately for her, he has a plan too. Since he can't just have monsters respawning for no reason, this is his one and only move. He opens a portal and dives right in to evade the monsters. Determined to be as fast as humanly possible, he blitzes through a huge portion of the forest using the portal, constantly leaping and skipping sections until he finally tracks down the queen. The air is heavily polluted, and the queen's pheromones are growing suffocatingly intense, summoning the entire rest of the nest to protect her. That right there is also a trap. Even so, relying on his sixth sense, Seo Yul dodges the first strike from this evolved insect, which is vastly more powerful than the others. Running from the beast, Seo Yul realizes he wasn't expecting a creature of this caliber. She must be truly desperate to kill him. Even with that size, this gargantuan creature ended up creating a bit of a disadvantage for herself. This means that when he strikes, the queen will be totally exposed. So Seo Yul throws the soldier insect inside the portal and attempts to push forward against the queen. However, the creature escaped the portal by severing its own arm and threw itself right on top of Seo Yul, right in front of the queen. Seo Yul snapped back that they were being a massive pain in the ass and that no matter how hard they tried, the outcome wasn't going to change. And since he couldn't manage to send just one, he sent everyone into the portal together, the soldier and the queen. This wasn't part of his original plan, but it would have to do, because now they were inside Seo Yul's domain. He already gave them the best advice he possibly could, warning them that if he were them, he wouldn't move an inch. The soldier charged straight at him, of course, and Seo Yul muttered that he was losing his mind for trying to have a conversation with a monster. First, he activated the Iron Rain. The projectiles flew straight toward the queen and the soldier, but they shielded themselves by flapping their wings. However, the arrows weren't coming from just one direction, so the soldier took a direct hit and, immediately after, ended up completely carbonized by another trap. Seo Yul spoke to the queen. Now that your greatest weapon is gone, we're finally all alone. He lunged forward, thinking that the queen's armor was durable enough to deflect the arrows, meaning he desperately needed to find a weak spot. Even with his spear attacks, he tried to force an opening, but he was repelled yet again. It was never going to be that easy. There were only 3 days left before the quest expired. He had plenty of time, but he wanted to wrap this up immediately. If he abandoned the dungeon just because he had time to spare, it would be exactly like running away from a bug. So he deployed the explosive block trap. The impact was devastating, flipping the hornet completely onto her backside and tearing away several of her legs. This drastically reduced his weapon's durability, but it was a martial art with pure destructive power that he unleashed immediately after. He said that if he was going to use this technique for the very first time, it was only fitting to use it on the Hornet Queen. It was the Crimson Lotus, a blazing fiery strike that tore right through and slaughtered the queen, instantly completing his quest. The dominant hand he used to wield the spear was badly injured due to the sheer force of that strike. He thought to himself about how he had saved countless people up until now. Yet in the end, he was still just a weakling, completely defenseless when facing truly powerful monsters. But now, he knew for a fact that he didn't need to run away anymore. The quest reward was sent directly to his inventory, and the first thing he needed to do was check it. He managed to snag a venomous stinger, a rare weapon with far more durability than his spear, featuring a unique effect that granted a 95% chance to paralyze monsters ranked 2 stars or below upon attacking. For 3 stars or above, that probability plummeted to 30%. He could easily adapt this depending on the situation, and honestly, it could turn out to be incredibly useful. However, the true jackpot was the Hornet Queen's Royal Jelly. Long story short, it permanently and massively boosted his mana sensitivity, but it came with a catch. Over time, he realized that whenever a labyrinth trap is triggered, mana is automatically consumed. Therefore, to scale up his traps, he desperately needed a larger mana pool. He gulped down the Royal Jelly without a single hitch, and instantly felt a violent storm of mana surging deep within his body, aggressively trying to force its way out. After everything Seo Yul had been through, he wasn't about to let this raw energy break him. He completely suppressed the mana, entirely reshaping his constitution. His senses became incredibly sharp, all thanks to a tiny piece of Royal Jelly. Then again, maybe that was to be expected. His stats, especially his total mana, skyrocketed. It wasn't for nothing that he put his life on the line to complete that quest. Still, he couldn't help but wonder what the side effects might be. Sure, aside from having to forcefully tame the mana to avoid any complications, he was completely in the dark, so he figured he'd cross that bridge when he got to it. The real main event was finally starting now. He was going to incorporate all of these monsters into his dungeon. Up until this point, the only creatures he had were ghouls and goblins. No matter how powerful he personally was, there was a strict limit to what he could accomplish entirely on his own, so he badly needed a backup stock. The system chimed in, stating that a hive is treated as a single entity and highly recommended installing a decomposition pool for it. This was the brand new trap unlocked by slaughtering the queen. If he submerged a monster's corpse into the decomposition pool, the spectral essence of that carcass would be seamlessly transferred to a designated monster, which meant that if he applied the pool's effect to this hive, every single egg would hatch significantly more powerful. The eggs from the hornet hive were successfully integrated into the dungeon, and he immediately noticed that one specific hornet looked far superior to the rest. It had to be the queen. After naming the new queen, he finally exited his own dungeon and went out to grab a few drinks with his friend Young Min. His friend mused that, thinking about it, since Lee Jung-hae volunteered to serve them first, she must have been secretly worried about Seyul's sudden deployment. The young man replied that, even so, she was running significantly later than they were. Young Min shrugged, noting that it was pretty much just part of her usual routine anyway, and asked what he had been up to. Seyul casually replied that he had spent the vast majority of his time gathering food for the hatchling he was currently raising. Young Min blinked, asking what he meant by that, and wondered out loud if the guy was casually breeding some kind of exotic, illegal pet. But, following the director's strong suggestion, Seo Yul had also retaken his rank evaluation test, and ended up completely shattering the limits of his current rank. His friend chuckled, commenting that anyone else would have gone on a vacation or something, adding that he was truly the biggest weirdo of them all. However, his friend also noticed that people were staring at him intensely because of the recent news. Seo Yul admitted he knew he wasn't the only one picking up on it, as he was feeling an overwhelming sensation of being closely watched. He jokingly questioned if he had somehow gotten more handsome. Jungmin fired back that, no matter how good he looked today, he seriously doubted that was the reason. Then, at long last, Lee Jung-hae finally showed up. Seyul playfully called her shameless, but abruptly stopped to ask why on earth her nose was suddenly bleeding. A little later, she sat there with a tissue plugged into her nose to stop the bleeding, and Jungmin offered that he could easily grill his own meat, but she stubbornly refused, insisting that today she would handle it, since she was the one who arrived late after all. The guy told her to at least keep her eyes open while doing it. Seyul sighed, telling her to just let him handle it because she was making him incredibly nervous. And, for some bizarre reason, when Lee Jung-hae looked up at Seyul again, she envisioned him as a jaw-dropping, gorgeous stallion and slammed her face straight down onto the table. Right then, the nasal plug popped right out. Blood started spurting everywhere all over again, and she collapsed completely onto the floor. Seyul stared in utter disbelief, wondering what the hell was wrong with this girl. Suddenly, another girl approached the table, and he urgently told her to call an ambulance, but it turned out the girl was actually just there to ask for his phone number. Seo Yul couldn't help but wonder what kind of ridiculous situation he had stumbled into, until he finally noticed something highly unusual and realized that this might be the exact root of the problem. Later on, when she was feeling a bit better, she stole a quick glance at Seo Yul and muttered that she must just be completely exhausted from overworking or something. Jungmin chimed in, agreeing that yeah, she really needed to stop putting in so much overtime. But Seo Yul knew the truth. It was entirely his fault. He had consumed the royal jelly to obtain his new special constitution, but the problem was that a hornet queen commands her soldiers entirely through pheromones, and he had completely forgotten that crucial fact. In other words, he was practically a walking magnet, exuding raw, irresistible attraction to the opposite sex. Lee Jung-hae spoke up, admitting that, honestly, her heart wouldn't beat wildly like this just from being tired. She confessed with with absolute sincerity that, right now, she was completely head over heels for him. Seo Yul panicked, telling her she needed to see a doctor immediately, and ordered the girl to back away. But in that exact moment, Seo Yul realized he was actually having fun, and that he had deeply missed having a normal, ordinary day like this. He had been so utterly consumed by getting stronger, killing monsters and things of that nature, that he had completely forgotten to actually live his life. Regardless, it was best for him to enjoy the present moment, because he would soon be heading out to the countryside and wouldn't be showing his face around here for a very long time. Later that day, Director Kwang-soo was reviewing the official results of Seo Yul's evaluation. The sheer magnitude of the young man's power was clocked at a staggering 7.5, keeping in mind that the strict cutoff score for an S rank is 7.8, meaning he was practically sitting on the exact same tier. The doctor nodded eagerly, confirming that was correct, and noted that this would massively elevate the entire department's reputation. But Director Kwang-soo countered, stating that for the time being, this information would stay strictly between the two of them. He didn't want to force such a heavy burden onto the kid. Besides, when the perfect moment finally arrived, the young man would reveal the full extent of his power on his own terms. Later on, he was on a ship bound for the countryside, thinking to himself that he could finally breathe a sigh of relief. The people from the rescue department had chased him all the way to the port because the son of a gun hadn't bothered to complete his paperwork before leaving. Seo Yul noticed that the ship he was on felt incredibly bizarre. It was absolutely massive, yet there were very few people on board. A little boy approached him, asking if he was heading to Ulleung-do. He replied that he was, and asked why the boy wanted to know. The boy responded that he rarely ever saw anyone on this particular ship. Seo Yul then asked if he took this ship often, and the kid explained that he didn't, but on the anniversary of his parents' death, he always visited the cemetery with his grandmother. Seo Yul felt a bit awkward and flustered by that response, but the little kid quickly spoke up, saying that it had happened a very long time ago, and that it was completely fine. The boy also explained that he didn't know exactly where the young man was going in Ulleung-do, but warned him to be careful, as it was an incredibly dangerous place. When the boy reunited with his grandmother, Seo Yul wondered to himself if that kid was genuinely a child, considering how mature he acted. In fact, Ulleung-do is one of the high-risk zones, where small portals constantly pop up at any given moment. The massive issue is that there aren't nearly enough awakened ones to deal with all of it, causing its safety rating to be the absolute worst for a very long time. The government seems completely indifferent, obviously, but even with all of that, the residents refuse to leave the area for one primary reason. It is likely their beloved home, and just on the journey there, the dangers were already showing themselves. A gargantuan aquatic creature with massive tentacles was aggressively trying to capsize the ship. When the vessel violently shook, Seo Yul went to check it out in person to see the creature for himself. Right then, he received a brand new extermination quest: defeat the Kraken before arriving in Ulleung-do. As a reward, he would receive random skills and equipment. However, as a penalty in case of failure, he would lose HP, mana, and would be completely suspended from entering his own labyrinth. Seo Yul noted that this specific penalty was incredibly difficult to deal with, and the quest even came with a strict restriction. The Kraken could not get within less than 10 kilometers of Ulleung-do. In other words, he had to defeat the creature fast. Meanwhile, over at the Ulleung-do branch of the department, one of the hunters was wrapping up the monthly report. Another man asked if basically nothing had changed over the past month, and the hunter replied that yes sir, that was correct. The chief said that this was good, and that they were going to keep things exactly that way, telling the hunter he could already head back to work. But another hunter, who was already completely wasted inside the department, asked if the man with the cigarette in his mouth wasn't supposed to be the actual boss. The smoker replied that those were strict orders from Kwang-soo, because apparently another punk is about to show up at the Ulleung-do branch. They had probably seen the kid on the internet, since he had recently made the news for being that exact brat who keeps causing problems. The drunkard asked if the Roman uncle hadn't sent the kid down there. The smoker replied that no, apparently not even he knew about it. But regardless, he and Overcross are tightly joined at the hip. So, when the time comes, they are going to give the kid a very warm welcome. The smoker asked if his little drunk brother could handle it, instigating him by saying that if he made the young man completely disappear, he would land a massive reward from Overcross and could become the chief of the rescue department all over again.